In the 1990s, turn-based JRPGs were in their golden era. They defined an entire generation of consoles, and they were absolutely everywhere. But one game changed all of that. And that game was... we can't play that song because of copyright, but just use your imagination, okay? Before we get into the video essay, I just wanted to jump in here and remind you to subscribe and like the video for more content like this every single month. It's free and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. After it was released in 2002, the landscape of turn-based JRPGs shifted dramatically. But did Kingdom Hearts end the golden age of turn-based JRPGs? I can't tackle a big question like that without my friend and resident Kingdom Hearts aficionado, FauxRetro. If you haven't already, you should go over and subscribe to his channel as well. He makes really fun deep dives into games like Sly Cooper and Ratchet & Clank with some really professional editing. He also forced me at gunpoint to play Psychonauts on Twitch recently, and I gotta say, I've never been so glad to have my life threatened. The Japan of the 1980s was one of abundance. The country was experiencing an unprecedented economic boom due to the growing popularity of its tech exports. Shoulder pads were big and neon signs hummed loudly. The land of the rising sun had it all. Well, almost.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons & Dragons didn't officially reach the island nation until 11 years after its release in America. And because the translation of the source material was so delayed, it didn't take long before Japan wanted playable fantasy epics of their own. Digital renditions of D&D like Ultima had already been released, laying the foundation for what a role-playing video game could look like. But localization at the time being questionable and expensive for the large amounts of text in most role-playing games, Japanese developers decided to take matters into their own hands. Turning the endless options present in a pen and paper tabletop adventure like Dungeons & Dragons into a video game with the restrictions of hardware at the time wasn't easy. But clever devs found workarounds to make that transition possible. And after a few experimental releases, the first game recognizable as a JRPG by today's standards was released, the original Dragon Quest. And to the developer's surprise, Japanese players were enamored with it, helping it sell over 1 million copies in the first 6 months. And in the mid-80s, sales like this for an unknown IP were completely unheard of. And remember, this was a Japan exclusive release until 3 years later. So, just for comparison, here is the national population of Japan from that year. Holy shit. This game, along with a couple of contemporaries, can pretty much be credited with creating the JRPG genre. To mimic the Dungeon Master's pre-planned face-offs, random encounter battles, to give a sense of adventure, an expansive overworld map to traverse, and to emulate the role of a D20, critical hit chances, and the almighty RNGesus. Praise be. Over the next decade, JRPGs developed their own tropes and standards. Moving away from their initial tabletop roots, they started flourishing in their own right, and telling very unique stories that just weren't possible with a pen and a D20. Coinciding with the explosive popularity of Dragon Ball Z and similar anime that were dominating Western airwaves, 90s JRPGs were yet another Japanese export that we could obsess over. We came for the outrageous hairstyles and absurdly large weapons, but we stayed for the grand storytelling and the heartwarming characters. And of course the fishing minigames. Can't forget about those. But after a decade defined by turn-based classics, the power of the newly released PlayStation 2 allowed developers to get a bit more creative with the JRPG formula moving into the new millennia.
And what better way to inspire the next generation of role-playing games than Super Mario 64? No, really. Super Mario 64 was an absolute bombshell for the gaming industry with its then revolutionary full 360 3D movement and action platforming. Square wanted in on this newfangled analog control, but lacked the kind of mascot to headline a project. No plumbers or hedgehogs or cats that need to die on sight.
Was it something I said?
However, with a chance meeting with a Disney executive and the eventual greenlight, Squaresoft's Kingdom Hearts began development for the then upcoming PlayStation 2. Now, Kingdom Hearts wasn't going to be your regular turn-based RPG. No. This was going to be an action RPG. Kingdom Hearts was going to be from Squaresoft, Final Fantasy. Director Tetsuya Nomura and his team were out to create something new, fusing role-playing mechanics and the storytelling of Final Fantasy with the free movement of Super Mario 64 with the personality of Disney's beloved animated features and characters. Developed in a little over 2 years, Kingdom Hearts would walk that tightrope and release in Japan on March 28, 2002, stunning gamers and other developers with its high-fidelity graphics and animation, fun characters, and action RPG gameplay that was all in real time. Just, let's not talk about the gummy shit parts. The game starred a brand new character, Sora, who would run around various Disney worlds with friends and
Goofy.
while also meeting a random assortment of Final Fantasy characters voiced by Mandy Moore and David Boreanaz. It was the early 2000s. Players could hack and slash enemies immediately as they appeared on screen and, with a convenient-ish command menu, make use of classic RPG magic spells and summons. However, instead of summoning an absolute demon from the pits of hell, we got Bambi frolicking and pooping bubbles absolutely everywhere instead. Cute. The Final Fantasy turn-based RPG roots were still there, however, it included the leap to full 3D gameplay with a dose of platforming and whatever the hell this was. Kingdom Hearts had revolutionized what an action RPG video game could truly be. Couldn't have said it better myself. Future games would have, exceptionally big shoes to fill.
Disney and Squaresoft's franchise mashup wasn't the first JRPG to buck the turn-based tradition, but it was by far the most successful game to do so by this point. The Tales of series had been utilizing action-based combat systems in their JRPGs as early as 1995, with Tales of Fantasia for the Famicom. The LMBS system invented for the game became the blueprint for what later entries in the series would look like. As far as I can tell, it was the first game to have a battle system like this, incorporating attacks, magic, and item usage like you would see in a classic turn-based JRPG, while letting you move and jump around in real time. Being the first title to utilize this type of battle system, it definitely had some kinks and shortcomings, hurting its original sales numbers, but the influence of this early attempt at action JRPG mechanics can be seen all over the place, especially in Kingdom Hearts' handheld follow-up Chain of Memories. I know no one watching this will agree, but the original Chain of Memories might be my favorite in the entire franchise? I know, blasphemy. As far as people in the States were concerned though, Sora's fight against the forces of darkness was the first blockbuster JRPG that didn't make you wait. Speaking of waiting, we didn't have to sit around too long before the market was flooded with even more action JRPGs. Sword of Mana, Dark Cloud 2, and Tales of Symphonia solidified the genre as something that was absolutely viable in the West, along with many other titles, of course. It was action JRPG mania. Like, holy shit. The subgenre became such a powerhouse that over the next couple of years, Japanese publishers would dust off older classics and finally localize them for Western audiences. It was a huge financial risk because localizing an epic action JRPG sometimes required a complete overhaul. The earliest action JRPGs like Trials of Mana, for example, were never exported to other markets for that reason. Well, until very recently anyway. Even so, this was the biggest spike in remakes, remasters, and ports the gaming industry had ever seen. I think we take remakes and remasters for granted these days, but in the early 2000s, it was definitely a rare sight. As action JRPGs became standards for the PS2 and GameCube generation, their turn-based counterparts were still doing big numbers on handheld systems, but the spectacle of 3D action-oriented battles gave them a lot more mass appeal. And yeah, let's be honest, action JRPGs gave characters a lot more, movement, right?
The hell are you looking at?
As well as a lot more options during combat, since timing, combos, and spacing were now all factors in your party's success. Each fight felt more immersive as a result, making it feel like you were part of your very own shonen anime, rather than just watching really big numbers appear on screen. That action-oriented influence even rubbed off on the franchise that originally birthed Kingdom Hearts. No, the other one.
In the air, something blew. The winds of change, if you will. And it smelled like action-oriented combat. After Final Fantasy made the huge leap to the PS2 with Final Fantasy X, the premier JRPG series would mark a slight departure from its turn-based roots with Final Fantasy XI Online, the series' first MMORPG. However, the big shift happened with the series' next mainline title, Final Fantasy XII. Gone were the random encounters, gone the turn-based combat. It was action-oriented, baby. It was very much small steps, with 12 taking some influence from 11 and incorporating more MMO-oriented combat options, like cooldowns for certain attacks. The RPG-ness was still there, but with newer, more quote-unquote exciting gameplay from other RPG series Squaresoft, now Square Enix at this point, that shook things up a bit. That's not to say they completely ditched the turn-based formula, but the main series would continue to drift towards more action-oriented gameplay. Not forgetting its roots, mind you, but less menu navigating, more press button for immediate pain. Final Fantasy XIII would continue the evolution to an extent, leaning more turn-based than 12 did. However, random encounters were still not a thing, and the combat acted as more of an evolution of the active time battles of earlier Final Fantasies. 14 Online would follow suit and evolve 11's MMO gameplay further. Again, the roots of the classic JRPG remained, but the combat leaned towards more player-controlled spectacle that couldn't be achieved in the traditional turn-based systems of Final Fantasies of old. Though, talking about acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV, featuring a free trial with award-winning expansion Heavensward, really deserves its own video, let's be honest. The true full-on move towards action gameplay wouldn't occur until 2016's Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV went full action with its combat. It was real-time with no random encounters, no transitions to separate battle arenas. It was an open world-ish, with action gameplay honestly not unlike, well, Kingdom Hearts. Before the game became Final Fantasy XV and was known as Final Fantasy Versus 13, we love Square's weird names for games here, the game honestly looked like a full-on Kingdom Hearts game, just in more realistic environments and slightly different combat styles. When the title transitioned into being 15 and a mainline entry in the series, more of the traditional Final Fantasy turn-based gameplay details returned, but still in a new action-oriented shell. The RPG staples were still there, like magics, potions, and so on, but recontextualized into a more fast-paced environment where attacks became more over-the-top, magic affected the environment, and summons were batshit insane. It doesn't get old, to tell you the truth. Final Fantasy went full spectacle with 15, and, while divisive, truly signaled a shift towards action RPG gameplay for core Final Fantasy titles. And with the teases for the upcoming Final Fantasy XVI looking like something straight out of Devil May Cry, this style of RPG seems to be here to stay. Again, at least for the numbered entries.
But just because some legacy JRPG franchises like Final Fantasy moved away from their turn-based roots, that doesn't mean this key-swinging sociopath child is entirely to blame. This move away from methodical gameplay is indicative of an overall trend in gaming more than anything. Genres in media exist in cycles. Nothing will be in the spotlight forever, and the things that were once out of style will come back for their retro appeal. No matter what medium we're talking about, the popularity of a genre can be seen in 4 stages: primitive, classical, revisionist, and revival. Look, Mom, I get to put my $50,000 film degree to some use on this channel. Finally! As a great example of those stages, we can look at the adventure game genre, since aside from a few niche hits, it has very little mainstream appeal at the moment. Primitive titles include those that first developed the hallmarks of the genre. Text-based adventures like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy are great examples of this. But then, as the genre hit its stride, we got classics like Monkey Island that fully realized the genre and showed what a pure adventure game can be. After a while, the genre hallmarks become stale, so we dip into the revisionist period, where games take conventions of the genre and turn them on their head in unexpected ways. Like how Psychonauts is actually an adventure game cleverly disguised as a collectathon platformer. And lastly, usually a few decades after the classical era, we see revivalist entries in the genre that engage our nostalgia and let us relive what made the genre great. Of course, there's always crossover between steps in the cycle, and it's not always as clear-cut as presented here. But the reason cycles like this naturally happen is because of publishers latching onto trends in order to capitalize on the popularity of something. So it just sort of is bound to happen. That's capitalism, baby! Turn-based JRPGs never really disappeared. They just waned in worldwide popularity for a bit. In Japan, they've been going strong the whole time. But after the introduction of the tantalizing browns and grays of first-person shooters, I guess the West got a little distracted by all the pew-pew and big explodies that were getting pumped out annually. But, of course, it's a cycle, which means after a drop-off in popularity, a genre is bound to have a... 2016 showed a drastic resurgence in the interest of turn-based JRPGs, a renaissance, if you will. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say it was all thanks to Atlus's release of Persona 5. For mainstream Western audiences, this release was quite a surprise. In fact, you could even say they never saw it coming. I'm so sorry. The game let players sneak around mind palaces and play secret agent. The characters were vibrant and interesting. It even had exciting menus to look at. Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable saying this game is what brought turn-based JRPGs back into the mainstream consciousness. And now, a few years after Persona 5's release, we see a lot of titles harkening back to the nostalgic classics while revamping outdated mechanics to keep things fresh for modern audiences. These changes address a lot of the issues that made the classics in the genre feel out of date. For the most part, random encounters have been phased out and the overworld movement has become a lot more dynamic. Static menus are a thing of the past as well, while the turn-based battles now require a bit more in-depth strategy, encouraging far more engagement from the player. But don't worry, the cornerstone of the fishing minigame hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, I made a whole video essay about just that. So if you're watching this and you haven't gotten into turn-based combat, this is honestly one of the best times to dive in. The idea that turn-based means slow or repetitive is pretty much a thing of the past at this point, because of all the modern quality of life updates. Plus, the fact that most of these titles release on the Switch these days means that you can get your grinding in on the bus ride to work. We're getting fresh entries breathing new life into beloved franchises, completely new and imaginative IPs, plus remasters and remakes of games I've honestly never heard of. The Live A Live HD 2D remake is looking pretty tasty if you ask me. Definitely much better than some other revivals that we've seen. Look, I just can't get past that weird UI overhaul. It looks so bad. And all of this is happening while action JRPGs are thriving as well. So even though one of the greats in the genre got an action movie overhaul, we're still getting great methodical combat from a lot of other places. I mean, the new Dragon Quest games are still doing numbers. I will fully go up to bat for Final Fantasy VII Remake, by the way. That was an amazing experience. So did Kingdom Hearts outright end the golden era of turn-based JRPGs? Yes and no. It came out at a time when advancing hardware made more fast-paced gameplay a lot more viable for developers. And after a long reign of turn-based classics, the genre popularity cycle was bound to move on eventually. But by the same token, the accessibility of Sora's campy-ass romp through Disney IPs showed publishers that the action JRPG genre had a very hungry audience. But the power of nostalgia has brought turn-based mechanics back in a really big way. If the last few Nintendo Directs are anything to go by, we're in the middle of a turn-based renaissance. Remasters, remakes, and completely new takes on what turn-based battles can be, giving a phoenix down to a genre that people thought was gone for the longest time. Turn-based mechanics have even jogged their way into fitness games like Ring Fit Adventure for the Switch. Now, that is some peak revivalist era shit if you ask me. If the game of chess can endure centuries with peaks and valleys in popularity, despite people saying it's boring, then I think turn-based mechanics can too. Damn it, we can't afford the rights to that one either! Hey there, thank you for watching the video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to click the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. I put over 40 plus hours into making these videos happen on the first Saturday of every single month, so I would really appreciate it. Thank you. And while you're at it, you can also share the video to help more people see it. And I just want to say another huge thank you to my friend FauxRetro for helping me out with this video essay. I really appreciate it, so let the people know where they can find you, Faux.
You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/FauxRetro, where I too have my own collection of video essays on things like Kingdom Hearts, along with feature-length deep dive documentaries on topics like the official Pokemon musical that was, yes, very real and very wild. I also stream regularly on Twitch at twitch.tv/FauxRetro if you want to make fun of me to my face.
Did we just get propositioned on twitch.tv?
Hell yeah, go follow him on all the things. All his links are down below in the description. And while I'm saying thank yous, I also want to thank Mumpow, Oyster Milk, Dear Papaya, Puzzled Monkey Tree, Voxamandius, and Nightmare God, who are my lovely monthly supporters over on my Ko-fi page. If you want to help support future video essays and this channel, you can follow the link in the description to also become a monthly supporter over on the Ko-fi page for as little as $4 a month. You'll get extra content, behind the scenes peeks at videos, and of course, a little shout out at the end of these videos. And I kind of forget to mention this at the end of the videos, but I am also a Humble partner. So if there's ever a game in any of my videos that looks interesting to you, I have affiliate links listed below that will take you over to humblebundle.com, where you can find a lot of great games on sale. I get a little bit of a kickback from every purchase. Part of your purchase becomes a donation to charity. It's a win-win-win. Plus, you're helping support the channel buying games you would have bought anyway, right? Anyway, see you in the next video.